what man of you, having 100 sheep, if he loses one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one which is lost until he finds it?
Looking at the miracles of Jesus as they're recorded for us in the Gospel of John. And there are 7 miracles recorded in John's Gospel. We've looked at how Jesus walked on water. We've seen how he defied the laws of physics. We've seen how he fed 10,000 people with a few loaves of bread and some fish. We've seen how Jesus was able to turn water into wine. We've seen how Jesus was able to heal a paralytic person and restore them to be able to walk. And today we're looking at how Jesus restored the sight of a man who had been blind from birth. You know, one of the incredible things about our God is he recognizes the limits of our understanding. God knows that it's very difficult for you and for me to get our heads around spiritual truths. They're kind of beyond what we can easily get to grips with. So our God is so good, he packages spiritual truths up in physical realities so that we might be able to comprehend them a little bit easier. For example, if you see the sun rise in the morning and you see it set at night, you can marvel at the world and how vast it is and the extent of our universe. And then you can go into the Bible and read that as far as the east is from the west, so far has God removed our sin for us. And you have something to compare it to, some frame of reference that helps it to make sense. You can watch the clouds form in the sky and come inland and hit the cool air and the warm air and all that stuff and the rain fall. And we can understand how that works. And then we can look in the Bible and see that God's word is like rain, that if it falls on our hearts, it will bring forth fruit. It will bring change within us. God is so good at packaging up spiritual truth in physical reality so that we might be better able to get a handle on the heart of God and on what he's trying and desperate to do in every one of our lives. And blindness is another good example of that. If you're here today and you know Jesus, then you will be able to look back in your life to a time when you would say, I was blind to who Jesus is. I wasn't able to identify him. He wasn't visible to me, and now the scales are gone from my eyes and I can see him. I can see him. And obviously we're not talking about our physical sight, we're talking about our hearts and our hearts being open to him. Last week at the baptism service, there was a testimony shared which really struck me. It was someone shared that it was like Jesus had lived in a flat next door all her life. And then that moment came when he came out of his flat and into hers. And she was like, why did I not invite you in sooner? You've been there all this time. Why did I not invite you in sooner? The blindness had gone, and she was able to see Jesus. Isaac Newton wrote it, didn't he, in Amazing Grace? I was blind, but now I see. So blindness has special spiritual significance, because while we talk about the physical ability to see what's in front of us, we can also talk about the condition of our heart. And I hope we can bear that in mind as we go through this morning, as we study this story. Blindness is also of special spiritual significance because in Isaiah, which is one of the books in the Old Testament, there are many prophecies about the coming of Jesus. And we know, don't we, that the miracles which are recorded in John's Gospel are recorded there, as John tells us himself in chapter 20. They're there so that we might know that Jesus is the Son of God. So it all ties together. The miracles in the Gospel tie into the prophecies that were foretold in the Old Testament. And in Isaiah in chapter 9, you'll read that the people walking in darkness have seen a great light. In chapter 28, you'll read that when the Messiah comes, blind eyes will be opened. In chapter 33, you'll read that the blind will receive sight. So there is this theme in the Old Testament of when the Messiah, when Jesus arrives, people who weren't able to see will see. Their eyes will be opened. So we know that blindness has special significance. And so we come to this story in John chapter 9. Let's read it together. John chapter 9, we're reading from verse 1. As Jesus went along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. His disciples asked him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Neither this man nor his parents sinned, said Jesus, but this happened so that the work of God might be displayed in his life. As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. Having said this, he spat on the ground, made some mud with the saliva, and put it on the man's eyes. I know that's weird. We'll come back to it. Go, he told the man. Wash in the pool of Siloam. This word means sent. So the man went and washed and came home seeing. His neighbors and those who had formerly seen him begging said, "Isn't this the same man who used to sit and beg?" And some claimed that he was. Others said, "No, he only looks like him." But he himself insisted, "I'm the man." "How then were your eyes opened?" they demanded. He replied, "The man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes. He told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and then I could see." "Where is this man?" they asked him. "I don't know," he said. I want to be controversial right from the start. I think this is one of Jesus' more ropey miracles. If you think about it, this poor man is sat blind at the side of the road begging. And Jesus comes along, sees his blindness, gets down next to him, spits in the dirt, and rubs it on his eyes. Now, this guy's day wasn't going particularly well anyway. He was blind and begging, sat by the roadside. I would argue that it actually got worse when he had someone's mud spit put into his eyes. I don't know if this has occurred to you, but back when Jesus walked on the earth, there was no Aquafresh mouthwash, and spit smells. I don't want mud spit on my eyes. And then, on top of that, Jesus rubs the mud in the guy's eyes and walks away. He leaves him sat there by the side of the road with mud on his blind eyes, and he still can't see. And Jesus has gone. It's a bit of a ropey miracle, isn't it? But we know, don't we, that Jesus can heal instantly. We've seen it already in John. We've seen that when he speaks to the paralytic and tells him to stand, the man stands and walks straight away. We've seen that when he speaks to the loaves and the fishes, they multiply immediately. We've seen that the waves don't let Jesus sink into them, but they go firm so he can walk on them. Jesus isn't somebody who needs some dodgy tactic to make his miracles happen. He doesn't need a delay. But in this miracle, there is one. In this miracle, the guy doesn't receive his sight instantly. There's this delay, this pause, and this weird approach of rubbing mud into the guy's eyes. And I'm sure I'm not the only person who, when I read this story, I just get to that bit and I go, why? Why, Jesus? You are so powerful. You are so able. Why would you do it like that? It's just weird. Why? You know, Jesus heals a number of people's sight in the Bible. There's another chap, and his story is in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. His name is Bartimaeus, blind Bartimaeus, and Jesus heals his sight. But there's a big difference between blind Bartimaeus and the blind man in this story. You see, the thing about blind Bartimaeus is he could see Jesus before he could see Jesus. He knew who Jesus was in his heart. He could see Jesus in his spirit before his eyes were healed, so he could see him with his eyes. And we know that because if you read the story of blind Bartimaeus, you'll see that as Jesus walks past, blind Bartimaeus goes crazy. He's shouting, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me. Jesus, heal me. Jesus, I'm blind. I need to see. Jesus, you are the Son of God. You can do this. Heal me." And everyone says, "Shh. Don't disturb him, don't bother him, he's going." And he goes, "No, you're not shutting me up. I want Jesus. Jesus, Son of David, heal me, heal me, heal me, heal me." So when Jesus comes to blind Bartimaeus, he knows that blind Bartimaeus can see him before he sees him, and he heals his sight. Straight away, just like that. But this guy in our story today in John chapter 9, he's not in the same place. He's sat by the roadside, and as far as we can tell from the scripture, there is no interaction. He doesn't cry out to Jesus. Jesus sees him and comes to him and starts this process by rubbing the mud spit on his eyes and giving him an instruction. Go and wash so that you might see. And I believe that Jesus does that because Jesus is always so much more concerned about our spiritual health than our physical health. He is almost so much more concerned about the state of our heart than the state of our body. He is always so much more concerned about our eternal destination than our temporary existence. Jesus is always looking into eternity. And so his ultimate aspiration in every encounter, every moment he touches someone's life, is that their eternity might be safeguarded, that their eternity might be transformed. And when he meets this man by the side of the road, that's what he's thinking. He's thinking, I can heal your sight, but I need to heal your sight as well. I can heal your eyes, but I also have to heal your heart. You know, we find this story in the Gospel of John. And the Gospels all have their own style. You might find if you read the Gospel according to Matthew, that it's more narrative. There is detail in there that maybe you didn't ask for. It's a little bit like if I get a story from my nana. My nana's stories tend to include details that I didn't ask for, I'm not particularly interested in, but I'm going to get them anyway. I'm going to be told that she had a nice cream tea at Marks and Spencer's. I'm going to be told what somebody was wearing, or that they'd taken the bus down to the seafront, or what the weather was like that day. There will be detail there that I never really asked for. And if you read Matthew, you'll find that the first chapter is actually full of this person had this person, had this person, had this person. There's a whole family tree there that we didn't really ask for. And don't get me wrong, it's got theological significance and all that stuff. But it's detail in Matthew. John's not like that. The gospel according to John is more a Twitter gospel. It's very, very short, succinct, quick phrases that tell you what's happening. And if you look in verse 7, it says this, so the man went and washed and came home seeing. That's what John says about this man's miracle moment. So the man went, he washed, and he came home seeing. There's not much there, not much to go on. In 2014, I decided to get laser eye surgery. The main reason that I decided it was we enjoyed taking our children, we had 2 kids at the time, we enjoyed taking them swimming. But if you're short-sighted and you wear glasses or contact lenses, you'll identify with this. If you go swimming with contact lenses and you get splashed, then your contact lenses shoot up the back of your eyeball and you spend the next half hour in the changing rooms trying to retrieve them from somewhere around the back of your eyeballs. If you go in glasses, you're just a dork. And if you go in without glasses or contact lenses, you lose your children because you can't see them in the swimming pool. So I was caught. I wanted to take my children swimming. I couldn't take them swimming, so I decided I would get laser eye surgery. And I went to the place over on Union Street at Optical Express, and they lay you down, and there's this machine comes across you, and it clicks and it whirs, and it does all this stuff, and then it slides away from the front of your face. And I remember looking up at the ceiling tiles, and I remember them because they were stained, and I looked up at these ceiling tiles, and they were fuzzy when the machine came across my eyes, and when the machine went, they were clear. It was amazing, a bit watery, but clear. And I thought, wow, this is brilliant. Obviously, they'd said to me, don't try and drive afterwards. So my wife had dropped me off, and she'd gone away to her friends who stayed by Aberdeen at the time. She'd gone over to her house to wait for me to get this done. And I came out, and I phoned Lynn. I said, look, I feel great. They put these anesthetic drops in my eyes. It's all done. I can see. It's amazing. And I'm just going to walk. I'll come over and meet you. So I started walking, and I had my sunglasses on because that's what they told me I needed to do. But the anesthetic drops started to wear off my eyes. And the thing they told me would happen, happened. My eyes started to feel like they were on fire, full of hot sand, and my eyelids were so heavy, I could barely keep my eyes open. And I'm trying to walk through town, trying to get to Aberdeen, to where Lynn was, so that she could take me home, but I was battling to keep my eyes open. And honestly, I would open my eyes for a bit, and then close them and take about 10 steps, blind, and then open them again, and go another. And it was pretty ropey, to be honest, especially crossing the roads. That is not a good technique. I don't recommend it. But I really struggled to get there, and I got there eventually, but just opening my eyes every sort of 15 yards to get a picture for where I was. I tell you that story because if it was that difficult for me to walk from Optical Express to Aberdeen, when I could open my eyes every 10 to 15 yards, I think it's reasonable for us to assume that this guy who had had the mud rubbed in his eyes by the side of the road didn't get to the pool of Siloam on his own. Someone or some people helped him make that journey. There was no way. He had been blind from birth, remember. He had never seen Jerusalem. He didn't have like the picture in his head of where he had to go, like you and I might if we just closed our eyes and tried to navigate somewhere we know well. He didn't have that. He had nothing. He lived in darkness. And Jesus says to him, go and wash in the pool of Siloam, and leaves. Doesn't help him get there. Doesn't tell him how to get there or anything. Just says, go and wash. So I think it's reasonable for us to assume from this verse, man went and washed and came home seeing, that his friends had something to do with it. That they helped him on that journey from the roadside to the poolside. And the reason that that's important for us is that in every journey of somebody coming to know Jesus, 3 people are involved. One is Jesus, who saves us, calls us, gave his life for us, and is desperate to know us. Then there's ourselves. And we need to accept him, choose to follow him, repent of our sin, and dedicate our lives to him. But there's also the people round about us who help us, who point us to Jesus, who tell us who he is, who continue to pray for us and support us, and who lead us as we seek to obey him. And if you take away any one of those 3, then it's a really difficult road to salvation. In fact, to prove this to you, if you go to the Middle East now, there are incredible stories coming out of the Middle East of how Jesus is meeting with people in dreams and in visions. And these testimonies come back of how people who are of Muslim faith see Jesus in a dream or a vision and they give their lives away to him. And sometimes it can be easy for us to say, I wish that would happen to my brother or my sister or my friend or my workmate. Jesus, would you just meet with them in a dream or in a vision? And I believe that Jesus says to us, well, no. Because you're in their life. I'm only meeting with those people in the Middle East because the church is underground, it's hidden, it can't be seen. They're not going to find somebody who's a Christian, so I go to them. But as long as you're in somebody's life, it is your job, your responsibility. It's so important that we remember that we can't save anybody. But it's also important that we don't forget that you and I carry a responsibility, even a burden. There should be a burden on our lives for the people who we rub shoulders with. A responsibility that we can't pass off no matter how hard we try. It is my job and it is your job to take the people in our lives and point them to Jesus. It is our job, our responsibility, our burden. And, I say the words burden knowing that many of you are thinking, burden sounds negative. Our call is to be burdened. If we are followers of Jesus, we are made to carry a burden. And that burden is the salvation of the people in our lives. It is ours to carry. And if we try to cast it off, then we're not doing what Jesus told us to do. He wants us to carry that burden. He made us to carry that burden. He's calling us to carry that burden. And the question comes to all of us, will we own it and take responsibility for it and say, yes, the people in my lives are my responsibility. They're my responsibility, my burden to carry as I seek to point them towards Jesus. So today we're going to look at these friends that this man had who understood that that the blind man was their responsibility, that it was their role to help him to get to Jesus. The first thing about these friends is that they sat the blind man where he was able to encounter Jesus. You have to imagine this man couldn't see anything, and the only way he would get any income would be by begging. So every day, someone had to take him from his home and place him by the roadside where he could beg for that day. And then at the end of the day, they would have to go and get him and bring him home again because he couldn't move himself around without the help of his friends and his family. Every day, they would be sitting him where he could beg. And I don't think it's unreasonable for us to think that maybe this day they had heard that Jesus was in town. They knew Jesus was at the temple. And maybe this day they positioned their friend where he could encounter Jesus. They sat him where Jesus might walk past. They sat him where there might be a moment with Jesus. That's our responsibility, to sit our friends, our colleagues, the one in our life where they might encounter Jesus, where maybe they might get a chance to meet with Jesus, where maybe they might hear from Jesus. If you're a parent in this place today, Our responsibility, if we have children, is to sit our kids where they can encounter Jesus. That's why week after week, my children are in creche and down in KCC Kids, because I want them to be where they can encounter Jesus, where they can meet with Jesus. As a side note, there's a benefit to having your kids in kids' church. My little boy, who's almost 6, was at his school disco a couple of weeks ago, and he was there and he was flossing. Who knows what flossing is? Oh, yeah. Now you know. Go and watch it on YouTube if you want to do it properly. I practiced. I did. I'm not going to stand up here and make an idiot of myself. But he was flossing. And round about him, the other parents were saying to my wife, they're saying, how does he know how to do that? How does he know how to floss? She's like, kids' church. He learned that at church. I love it that at the school disco, my little boy is testifying to the life and the energy in this church by knowing dance moves that none of his friends know. That's significant. It matters because, hey, our world thinks that the church is dull. Our world thinks that the church is dead. And my little boy is in his school flossing and saying, I learned that at church. Come on! That's what we're about. That's why I'm going to sit him where he can encounter Jesus. I try and read the Bible with my kids as well. The other day I said to Libby, come on, it's time for your Bible story. She said, Daddy, I don't like the Bible. My word, Pastor Ian, get over here right now. We've got a situation. I said, Libby, why don't you like the Bible? She says, it's got God in it, and I want a surprise. All right, little adrenaline junkie. She wants to be wowed by God when she meets him. I don't want to know too much about God. We keep the Bible. But we try our best to read the Bible with our children, to sit them where they might encounter Jesus. With our friends, sitting them where they might encounter Jesus means bringing them here. It might mean sharing something with them on Facebook, a video. It might just mean a coffee and a conversation. It doesn't matter whether they're sitting here or whether you're speaking to them in Starbucks, but are we sitting our friends where they might encounter Jesus? Our workmates, our colleagues, students, you have an incredible opportunity. Because at university, everyone will listen to any wacky idea. So just throw another wacky idea in the mix and have a conversation about it and sit your friends where they might encounter Jesus. It's our responsibility. In Romans, Paul says, in Romans 10, he says, how can they call on the one they haven't believed in? How can they believe in the one of whom they haven't heard? And how can they hear without someone preaching to them? I don't know about you, but when I hear Paul say that, I hear frustration in his voice. Just that kind of, he's frustrated because he knows that everyone needs to hear. And he's speaking to the church and he's saying, come on, this is up to us. How are they going to believe if we don't tell them? How are people going to come to Jesus if we don't sit them where they might encounter him? If that blind man had been left at home, he would still have been blind. But he got his sight because his friends came and they took him and they put him by the roadside where he was able to meet with Jesus. And that's the call on each of us for the friends in our lives to be taking them and sitting them where they might meet with Jesus. The next thing is that they showed the man the way to obey Jesus. And I really think this took incredible faith from the guy's friends. You have to think that in the middle of their day, they have their blind friend coming to them and going, look, I've got some mud on my eyes, and I want you to take me to the pool of Siloam, because if I wash it off, I'm going to see again. And his friends had the faith to believe that Jesus was going to do what he said he would do, and to disrupt their day and whatever else they had planned so they could take their friend to the pool so he could be obedient to Jesus. In every journey to Christ, there are people who help us and show us the way. If you read through Acts, you'll see that on the road to Ethiopia, the Ethiopian eunuch invites Philip up into the chariot with him because he says, I'm struggling with this. I can't get my head around it. Would you show me what it means and who Jesus is? If you see Saul, he has the Damascus Road experience where he's blinded. Again, blinded. Can't see anything and is sitting waiting for somebody to come and explain to him and show him and pray with him. And who comes along? Ananias comes and puts a hand on him and prays for him, and the scales fall and he's able to see Jesus and go into the life that Jesus has for him. For us, when we came to this church, I still remember being down in the coffee bar and we were still just new, still trying to find our way. And Elizabeth came along and came beside us and said, hey, you guys need to get involved in Welcome Team. It doesn't sound like much, but it was showing us the way to obey and to take our next step and to progress and to get closer to Jesus. For all of us, it's our responsibility to be showing our friends the way. Maybe they've had an encounter. And sometimes this can feel like the longest journey. It can feel like such a long way between the initial encounter and the moment when they kneel at the pool of Siloam and wash the mud out of their eyes. We have to keep going. We have to stick with the one. Persevere and pray. Believe for the prodigals, that those who knew God once will come back. Believe for the ones who came once and had an encounter and a moment and then have disappeared. Believe that they will come back. Stick with them. Don't give up. Keep praying. Keep believing. Keep inviting. Keep hoping and trusting that that moment will come when the encounter at the roadside becomes the miracle at the poolside. And in that gap, it is our job to stick in and to show them the way that you obey Jesus, the way that you follow Jesus, the way to the pool where you take that step of obedience. I had a friend that I worked with a few years ago, and he told me that he'd had a sore neck once, and a pastor that he knew had prayed for him, put his hand on his neck and prayed for him. And he said, it was weird, I felt like this warmth, and then my neck got better. And I was like, wow, you met with Jesus. I didn't say that, I wish I had. But in my mind, I thought you had that encounter with Jesus. I said, what happened next? Nothing. Nothing. He just went on with his life. That moment of encounter with Jesus. But there was no follow-up to show the way to obey. No follow-up of showing what it means to walk with Christ. That's all of our responsibility. To show people the way that we obey Jesus, the way that we follow him. And then they get to the pool. And the pool of Siloam is the pool of sending, of being sent. And as this man falls into the pool and washes, I say he falls into the pool. You would fall into the pool too if you had someone spit mud on your eyes. He goes to the pool, he rubs the mud from his eyes, and he washes them, and he sees. And he sees what's in front of him, but this is also the start of him seeing who Jesus is, of him understanding in his heart who Jesus is, what Jesus has done for him. And for every single one of us, that has to be the hope and the heart as we seek to reach out to the one in our lives. That there will come that moment when everyone that we're praying for and believing for falls into the pool, takes the step of obedience, and sees Jesus. That they meet with Jesus. That they have that moment where they say, I was blind, but now I see you. I see you, Jesus. I see who you are. I see what you've done for me. And my whole life is now sent into following you. Every day I have now is about declaring who you are. Because that's what this blind man does. If you read through the rest of John chapter 9, you'll see that in verse 11 he says, as he's asked, how were your eyes opened? He says, the man they called Jesus made some mud, put it on my eyes, and told me to go to Siloam and wash. So I went and washed, and now I can see. Then by verse 25, he says, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. But I know this, I was blind, but now I see. By verse 33, the blind man is saying, if this man were not from God, he could do nothing. And by verse 38, he meets Jesus, and he says, Lord, I believe, and he worships him. Come on. That's what we're believing for our friends and our family, for the ones in our lives. We're believing that they will go on that journey between the encounter at the roadside to the miracle at the poolside to the moment when they see and know and worship Jesus. But it won't happen unless we, as their friends and their family, are with them every step of the way. And we don't give up. And we don't quit, but we persevere, and we believe, and we hope, and we trust that that moment will come. Do you know, in 1911, a 13-year-old boy called Jack decided to renounce his faith that he'd been brought up with. He'd been brought up in the Church of England. And he decided that he didn't believe any of that anymore, and he was going to become an atheist. His belief was that there is no God. He renounced all his faith, age 13. And he went on and he fought in the Great War. He was actually injured. He was rehabilitated. He studied, he read, he loved literature, and he went to Oxford to read the classics. And while he was at Oxford, he met his friend called John when they were aged 28, still an atheist. And John and he became really good friends. They shared the same interests, literature, storytelling, writing. And they would chat and they would talk, and John would share his faith with Jack, the atheist. At the age of 31, Jack decided that actually maybe there is a God, and accepted that a God does exist, but he still hadn't become a Christian. And John and he continued to talk for another 2 years until at the age of 33, Jack accepted Jesus. And in his own words, he was the most reluctant convert in all of Great Britain. But Jack came to Christ because John stuck with him over all that period of searching and not finding, that period of renouncing atheism and accepting that God does exist, that period of in between, there is a God, but who is he? You know, Jack is C.S. Lewis. And that was in 1931 that he accepted Jesus. In 1939, World War II broke out. And C.S. Lewis's writings, which we now know as Mere Christianity, were broadcast over the radio to millions of people in this country in our darkest hour, telling of who Jesus is. Millions heard about Jesus as the bombs were falling and as people were dying, because John stuck with C.S. Lewis. John is J.R.R. Tolkien, the writer of The Lord of the Rings. The power of sticking with the one. C.S. Lewis obviously went on and wrote the Chronicles of Narnia. 100 million copies sold of a book which so clearly tells the salvation story as Aslan lays down his life for those children. And many of you will have read those books and been touched by them. An incredible impact, but it comes from his friends sticking with him all the way through that journey. Can we bow our heads as we close?